The Seaman. Created by Stephen Johnson. Chapter 1. The Storm. The sea was a tempest of fury, its waves clawing at the sky like desperate hands. Elias Carter clung to the helm of his small sailboat, the Wanderer, as the storm raged around him. The wind howled like a wounded beast, and the rain lashed his face, stinging his skin. He had set out from the port of San Francisco 2 weeks ago, seeking adventure, seeking something more than the monotony of his life on land. But now, as the storm swallowed him whole, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Elias was no stranger to the sea. His father had been a fisherman, and he had grown up with salt water in his veins. But this storm was different. It felt alive, as if it had a will of its own. The compass spun wildly, and the charts he had meticulously studied were useless in the chaos. He was lost, utterly and completely. A deafening crack split the air, and Elias turned just in time to see the mast snap like a twig. It crashed into the deck, narrowly missing him. The Wanderer groaned in protest, its timbers straining against the relentless waves. Elias knew he had only minutes before the boat was swallowed by the sea. He scrambled to the life raft, his hands trembling as he untied the ropes. The raft inflated with a hiss, and he threw it overboard, leaping after it just as a massive wave engulfed the Wanderer. The cold water stole his breath, and for a moment, he was submerged in darkness. He kicked desperately, breaking the surface just as another wave slammed into him. The storm raged for hours or maybe days. Elias couldn't tell. Time blurred into a haze of fear and exhaustion. He clung to the raft, his fingers numb, his body battered by the relentless waves. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind conjuring strange visions. A glowing light beneath the waves, a voice whispering his name, a shadowy figure watching him from the depths. When the storm finally subsided, the sea was eerily calm. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the water. Elias blinked, his vision blurred, and squinted at the horizon. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of his exhausted mind. But as the raft drifted closer, the shape became unmistakable. An island. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering cliffs rose from the sea, their jagged peaks shrouded in mist. Dense jungle stretched inland, its canopy of vibrant green. And at the center of the island, a massive mountain loomed, its summit hidden in the clouds. Elias's heart raced as he paddled toward the shore. The island was uncharted, a blank spot on every map he had ever studied. He didn't know what he would find there, but he knew one thing for certain: he was the first to set foot on it. Chapter 2. The First Steps. The raft scraped against the sandy shore, and Elias stumbled onto the beach, his legs weak and unsteady. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth, and the jungle hummed with the sounds of unseen creatures. He collapsed onto the sand, his body trembling with exhaustion. When he finally found the strength to stand, he surveyed his surroundings. The beach stretched in both directions, curving around the island like a crescent moon. The jungle was dense and impenetrable, its vines and roots tangled in a chaotic web. And the mountain, it seemed to watch him, its presence both awe-inspiring and unnerving. Elias knew he needed shelter, food, and fresh water. He also knew he needed to explore the island, to uncover its secrets. But as he took his first steps into the jungle, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The jungle was alive with sound and movement. Birds with iridescent feathers flitted through the trees, their calls echoing through the canopy. Strange plants with vibrant flowers and twisted roots lined the path, their colors almost too vivid to be real. Elias felt as though he had stepped into another world, a place untouched by time. As he ventured deeper, he found a stream of crystal-clear water. He drank greedily, the cool liquid reviving him. Nearby, he discovered a grove of fruit trees, their branches heavy with ripe, unfamiliar fruit. He ate his fill, the sweet juice running down his chin. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the jungle, Elias realized he was not alone. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and he caught glimpses of movement in the underbrush. He thought he saw a figure darting between the trees, but when he called out, there was no response. That night, as he built a makeshift shelter and lit a fire, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the island was testing him. It was as if the land itself was alive, watching, waiting. He didn't know what he would find in the days to come, but he knew one thing for certain. This island held secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. Chapter 3: Signs of Life. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls of Elias's makeshift shelter. He sat cross-legged, staring into the flames, his mind racing. The jungle was alive with the sounds of the night, chirping insects, distant calls of nocturnal creatures, and the occasional rustle of leaves. But beneath it all, Elias sensed something else. A presence. Something, or someone, was out there. The next morning, Elias woke with the sun. The jungle was bathed in golden light, and the air was thick with the scent of dew and earth. He decided to explore further inland, following the stream he had found the day before. The water led him deeper into the jungle, where the trees grew taller and the underbrush thicker. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The trees here were marked, not by nature, but by human hands. Carved into the bark were symbols, intricate and ancient. Elias ran his fingers over the grooves, feeling the weight of time etched into the wood. The symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen, a language lost to the ages. Further along the stream, he found more evidence of human presence. A stone path, overgrown with moss and vines, wound its way through the jungle. Elias followed it, his heart pounding with anticipation. The path led to a clearing, where the ruins of a stone structure stood. It was a temple or what remained of one. The walls were crumbling, and the roof had long since collapsed, but the grandeur of the place was still evident. Elias stepped inside, his boots crunching on broken stone. The air was cool and damp, and the walls were covered in more of the strange symbols. At the center of the temple stood a pedestal, and on it rested an object that made Elias's breath catch in his throat. It was a statue, small but exquisitely carved. It depicted a figure with elongated limbs and a serene expression, its hands clasped in front of it. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the details so fine that Elias could see the individual strands of hair on the figure's head. But what struck him most was the material. It was made of a stone he didn't recognize, smooth and cold to the touch, with a faint, almost imperceptible glow. Elias carefully picked up the statue, turning it over in his hands. As he did, he noticed something etched into the base, a series of symbols, similar to those on the trees and walls. He couldn't read them, but he had the distinct feeling that they were a message, a warning, perhaps, or an invitation. He pocketed the statue and continued exploring the temple. In a corner, partially hidden by rubble, he found a collection of artifacts, pottery shards, tools, and what appeared to be fragments of clothing. They were old but not ancient. Someone had been here and not too long ago. Elias's mind raced. If there were others on the island, where were they? And why had they left these things behind? He felt a mix of excitement and unease. He wasn't alone, but he didn't know if that was a good thing. Chapter 4: The Encounter. Elias spent the next few days exploring the island, mapping its terrain and searching for more signs of life. He found more ruins, smaller structures scattered throughout the jungle, all marked with the same symbols. He also discovered caves hidden in the cliffs, their entrances obscured by vines. Inside, he found more artifacts, tools, weapons, and even what appeared to be remnants of food stores. But the most compelling evidence came one evening, as he was returning to his camp. He heard a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone striking stone. He followed the sound, moving quietly through the jungle. The tapping grew louder, and soon he saw a flicker of light through the trees. He crept closer, his heart pounding. In a small clearing, he saw a figure crouched over a stone, chiseling away at it. The figure was human, or at least humanoid, but their features were obscured by a hooded cloak. Elias hesitated, unsure whether to reveal himself. Before he could decide, the figure stood and turned, as if sensing his presence. Elias froze. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but he could feel their gaze on him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the figure raised a hand, gesturing for Elias to follow. Without a word, they turned and disappeared into the jungle. Elias hesitated, then followed. The figure moved quickly and silently, weaving through the trees with ease. Elias struggled to keep up, his boots slipping on the damp ground. They climbed higher, the terrain growing steeper, until they reached a cave hidden in the cliffs. The figure stopped at the entrance and turned to Elias. For the first time he saw their face. It was a woman, her features sharp and angular, her skin a deep bronze. Her eyes were dark and piercing, and they bore into Elias with an intensity that made him shiver. "You are not supposed to be here," she said, her voice low and melodic. "This island is not for you." Elias swallowed hard. "Who are you? What is this place?" The woman studied him for a moment, then gestured for him to enter the cave. "There is much you need to know." Chapter 5. The Truth. The cave was larger than Elias had expected, its walls lined with carvings and symbols. The woman led him to a chamber deep inside, where a fire burned in the center. Around it sat several other figures, all cloaked and hooded. They looked up as Elias entered, their expressions unreadable. The woman gestured for Elias to sit. "My name is Kaya," she said. "We are the keepers of this island. For generations, we have protected its secrets from the outside world." Elias's mind raced. "What secrets? Why are you hiding here?" Kaya's gaze was steady. "This island is not like other places. It is alive, Elias. It has a will, a consciousness. It chooses who may come and who must leave. You were brought here for a reason, but you must prove yourself worthy to stay." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, prove myself?" Kaya leaned forward, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The island will test you. It will show you things you may not want to see. But if you pass its trials, you will understand. You will become one of us." Elias looked around at the faces of the keepers. They were silent, their expressions solemn. He realized then that he had stumbled into something far greater than he had imagined. This island was not just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and it had chosen him for a purpose. But what that purpose was, he had yet to discover. Chapter 6. The Trials Begin. Kaya led Elias out of the cave at dawn, the jungle alive with the sounds of morning. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden beams. She walked ahead of him, her movements graceful and deliberate, as if she were in tune with the rhythm of the island itself. Elias followed, his mind still reeling from the revelations of the night before. "The island's trials are not physical," Kaya said without turning around. "They are tests of the mind and spirit. You will face your deepest fears, your greatest regrets, and your most hidden desires. Only by confronting them can you prove yourself worthy." Elias frowned. "How do I prepare for something like that?" Kaya glanced over her shoulder, her dark eyes piercing. "You don't. You simply endure." They arrived at a clearing where the ground was covered in soft moss, and a circle of stones stood in the center. The stones were tall and narrow, their surfaces etched with the same symbols Elias had seen throughout the island. In the middle of the circle was a flat stone slab, smooth and cold to the touch. "Lie down," Kaya instructed, gesturing to the slab. "The first trial will begin." Elias hesitated, his heart pounding. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew there was no turning back. He lay down on the slab, the stone cool against his back. Kaya stood at the edge of the circle, her hands raised as she began to chant in a language Elias didn't understand. The air around him seemed to shift, growing heavier, and the symbols on the stones began to glow faintly. Elias's vision blurred, and he felt a strange pull, as if his consciousness were being drawn out of his body. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was no longer in the clearing. Chapter 7. The First Trial. Elias stood in a familiar place, the small fishing village where he had grown up. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled his ears. He looked around, confused. This was his childhood home, but something felt off. The streets were empty, the houses dark and silent. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. No one answered. He walked toward his family's house, his heart sinking as he approached. The door was ajar, and inside, the furniture was covered in dust. It was as if no one had lived there for years. "Mom? Dad?" he called, his voice trembling. A figure appeared in the doorway, and Elias's breath caught in his throat. It was his father, but he looked different, older, more worn. His eyes were hollow, and his face was lined with grief. "You left us," his father said, his voice heavy with accusation. "You left and never came back." Elias's chest tightened. "I didn't mean to. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to find something more." His father shook his head. "And what did you find, Elias? What did you gain by leaving us behind?" Elias opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He felt a wave of guilt and regret wash over him. He had left his family to pursue his own dreams, and in doing so, he had abandoned them. He had never considered how his choices might have hurt them. The scene shifted, and Elias found himself standing on the deck of the Wanderer, the storm raging around him. He saw himself clinging to the helm, his face twisted in fear and desperation. He watched as the mast snapped, as the boat was swallowed by the waves, as he leaped into the life raft and drifted away. "This is what you wanted," a voice whispered in his ear. It was his own voice, cold and mocking. "Adventure. Freedom. And now you're alone." Elias fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head. "I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't know I'd lose everything." The voice laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "But you did. And now you have to live with it." Chapter 8. The Second Trial. The scene shifted again, and Elias found himself standing in the jungle, the island's mountain looming in the distance. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. A figure emerged from the trees, a man tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that was both familiar and strange. It took Elias a moment to realize who it was, himself, but older, stronger, more confident. This version of him carried a spear and wore a cloak made of animal skins. His eyes were sharp and calculating, and there was a coldness in them that made Elias uneasy. "You're weak," the other Elias said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've always been weak. You let fear control you, and now you're nothing but a shadow of what you could be." Elias shook his head. "That's not true. I've survived. I've made it this far." The other Elias smirked. "Surviving isn't the same as living. You've been running from yourself, from your potential. But here, on this island, there's nowhere left to run." He raised the spear, and Elias instinctively stepped back. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to face the truth," the other Elias said. "You're afraid of who you could become. You're afraid of your own strength, your own power. But you can't hide from it forever." Elias felt a surge of anger. "I'm not afraid. I don't want to lose myself." The other Elias laughed. "You already have. The only way to find yourself is to embrace what you've been running from." Before Elias could respond, the other Elias lunged at him, the spear aimed at his chest. Elias dodged, but the attack was relentless. He realized then that this was the trial, to confront the darker, stronger version of himself, to accept that part of him and integrate it into who he was. The fight was brutal, both physically and emotionally. Elias was forced to confront his own insecurities, his own fears of failure and inadequacy. But as the battle raged on, he began to understand. He couldn't deny the strength within him, nor could he let it consume him. He had to find balance. With a final, desperate move, Elias disarmed his opponent and stood over him, breathing heavily. The other Elias looked up at him, a faint smile on his lips. "Good," he said. "You're learning." Chapter 9. The Third Trial. The jungle faded, and Elias found himself standing at the base of the mountain. The air was thin and cold, and the path ahead was steep and treacherous. Kaya appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. "This is the final trial," she said. "You must climb the mountain and reach the summit. But be warned, the island will test you one last time. It will show you what you desire most, and you must resist the temptation to stay." Elias nodded, his resolve firm. He had come this far and he wasn't going to turn back now. The climb was grueling, the path littered with loose rocks and hidden dangers. The higher he went, the thinner the air became, and the more his body ached. But he pressed on, driven by a determination he hadn't known he possessed. As he neared the summit, The air around him seemed to shimmer, and the landscape changed. He was no longer on the mountain. He was back in his hometown, standing in front of his family's house. The door opened, and his parents stepped out, their faces filled with joy and relief. "You're home," his mother said, tears in her eyes. "We've missed you so much." Elias felt a pang of longing. This was what he had wanted, what he had dreamed of during his darkest moments. But he knew it wasn't real. "I can't stay," he said, his voice breaking. "This isn't real." His father stepped forward, his expression pleading. "But it could be. You could stay here with us. You could have the life you always wanted." Elias shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I can't. I have to keep going." The scene dissolved, and Elias found himself standing at the summit of the mountain. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the island stretched out below him, vast and beautiful. Kaya appeared beside him, a look of approval in her eyes. "You've passed the trials," she said. "The island has accepted you." Elias felt a surge of relief and pride, but also a deep sense of peace. He had faced his fears, his regrets, and his desires, and he had emerged stronger for it. "What happens now?" he asked. Kaya smiled. "Now you become one of us, the keeper of the island. Its secrets are yours to protect, and its will is yours to uphold." Elias looked out over the island, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known before. He had found what he was searching for, not just adventure, but purpose. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Chapter 10: The Keeper's Oath. The summit of the mountain was a place of stillness, as if time itself had paused to witness Elias's transformation. Kaya stood beside him, her presence both grounding and otherworldly. She reached into the folds of her cloak and withdrew a small, intricately carved box. Inside was a pendant, a smooth, oval stone that seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. It was the same material as the statue he had found in the temple. "This is the heart of the island," Kaya said, her voice reverent. "It is a fragment of the island's consciousness, a symbol of your bond with it. Wear it always, and it will guide you, protect you, and remind you of your duty." Elias took the pendant, the stone warm against his palm. As he fastened it around his neck, he felt a surge of energy, as if the island itself were welcoming him. The air around him seemed to hum, and the symbols etched into the stones at the summit began to glow faintly. "You are now a keeper," Kaya said. "Your life is no longer your own. You are bound to the island, and its will is your purpose. Do you accept this responsibility?" Elias hesitated for only a moment. He thought of the trials he had endured, the fears he had faced, and the peace he had found. This was his calling, his destiny. "I accept," he said, his voice steady. Kaya nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Then let us begin your training. There is much you need to learn." Chapter 11: The Island's Secrets. Over the following weeks, Kaya taught Elias the ways of the keepers. She showed him how to read the island's symbols, how to interpret its whispers in the wind and its messages in the waves. He learned to navigate the jungle with ease, to find food and water where none seemed to exist, and to communicate with the island's creatures. But the most profound lessons were those about the island itself. Kaya explained that the island was not just alive, it was ancient, a remnant of a forgotten world. It had existed long before humans walked the earth, and it would endure long after they were gone. Its consciousness was vast and unknowable, but it had chosen Elias for a reason. "The island is a guardian," Kaya said one evening as they sat by a fire in the jungle. "It protects something, a power, a knowledge, a truth. We keepers are its stewards, ensuring that this secret remains hidden from those who would misuse it." Elias frowned. "What kind of power are we talking about?" Kaya's expression grew serious. "The island holds the key to creation and destruction. It is a place where the boundaries between worlds are thin, where the past, present, and future converge. Those who seek to control it would bring chaos to the world." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "And what happens if someone tries to take it?" Kaya's eyes darkened. "Then we must stop them, no matter the cost." Chapter 12: The Strangers. One morning, as Elias was gathering fruit near the beach, he noticed something unusual. a ship on the horizon. It was small but sleek, its sails billowing in the wind. His heart raced as he realized it was heading for the island. He ran to find Kaya, who was meditating in the temple ruins. "There's a ship," he said, breathless. "It's coming this way." Kaya's eyes snapped open, her expression grim. "We must prepare. If they land, we cannot let them leave." Elias felt a pang of unease. "What do you mean? We can't just—" "We have no choice," Kaya interrupted. "The island's secret must be protected at all costs. If they discover it, the consequences will be catastrophic." Elias nodded, though his stomach churned. He had sworn to protect the island, but the thought of harming others, even strangers, filled him with dread. They watched from the cliffs as the ship approached. It anchored just offshore, and a small boat was lowered into the water. 6 figures climbed in and began rowing toward the beach. Elias's heart pounded as he recognized their equipment: cameras, notebooks, and tools. They were explorers or perhaps scientists. Kaya's hand tightened on her spear. "They must not reach the jungle." Elias hesitated. "Maybe we can reason with them. Convince them to leave." Kaya shook her head. "They will not listen. They will see only what they want to see, and they will not stop until they find it." The strangers landed on the beach, their voices carrying on the wind. They were laughing, excited, oblivious to the danger they were in. Elias felt a surge of conflicting emotions: fear, anger, pity. He didn't want to hurt them, but he couldn't let them endanger the island. As the strangers began to unpack their gear, Kaya turned to Elias. "This is your first test as a keeper. Will you protect the island, or will you let it fall?" Elias took a deep breath, his hand gripping the pendant around his neck. The stone pulsed faintly, as if urging him to act. He looked at Kaya, then at the strangers, and made his decision. "I'll stop them," he said. "But I'll do it my way." Chapter 13. The Confrontation. Elias descended the cliffs, moving quickly and silently through the jungle. He reached the beach just as the strangers were setting up camp. He stepped out of the trees, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "You need to leave," he said, his voice firm. "This island is dangerous. You're not safe here." The strangers froze, their eyes wide with surprise. One of them, a man with a beard and a wide-brimmed hat, stepped forward. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "My name is Elias," he said. "I'm the survivor. I've been here for months, and I'm telling you, you need to leave." "No." The man laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. "We're not going anywhere. This island is uncharted, unexplored. We're here to study it." Elias's heart sank. He had hoped they would listen, but he could see the determination in their eyes. They weren't going to leave willingly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "This island isn't what you think it is. It's alive, and it doesn't want you here." The strangers exchanged uneasy glances, but the man with the hat shook his head. "We're not afraid of a little jungle. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." Elias felt a surge of frustration and fear. He didn't want to hurt them, but he couldn't let them stay. He glanced back at the jungle, where he knew Kaya was watching, waiting. He had to act. As the strangers turned back to their gear, Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone, a gift from the island. He threw it into the jungle, where it landed with a loud crack. The sound echoed through the trees, and the jungle seemed to come alive. Birds screeched, branches snapped, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The strangers froze, their faces pale with fear. "What was that?" one of them whispered. "The island," Elias said, his voice low and urgent. "It's warning you. Leave now, or you won't survive." The man with the hat hesitated, then nodded. "All right, we'll go." Elias watched as they hurried back to their boat, their earlier confidence shattered. He felt a pang of guilt but pushed it aside. He had done what he had to do. As the boat rowed back to the ship, Kaya emerged from the jungle, her expression unreadable. "You let them go," she said. Elias nodded. "I did. They won't be back." Kaya studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You chose compassion over violence. Perhaps the island was right to choose you." Elias felt a flicker of pride, but it was tempered by the knowledge that his journey was far from over. The island's secrets were vast, and its dangers were many. But he was ready to face them, as a keeper, as a protector, and as a man who had found his place in the world. Chapter 14. The Island's Whispers. After the strangers left, Elias felt a strange mix of relief and unease. He had protected the island, but the encounter had shaken him. He couldn't stop thinking about the look in their eyes, the fear, the confusion, the disbelief. They had seen something they couldn't explain, and Elias knew it wouldn't be the last time outsiders came searching for answers. Kaya, however, seemed unbothered. She moved through the jungle with the same calm confidence as always, her focus unwavering. She continued Elias's training, teaching him to listen to the island's whispers, to interpret its moods and intentions. The pendant around his neck grew warmer as his connection to the island deepened, and he began to feel its presence in everything: the rustle of leaves, the flow of water, the pulse of the earth beneath his feet. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the temple ruins, Kaya turned to him with a serious expression. "The island has shown me something," she said. "A vision of what is to come." Elias frowned. What kind of vision? Kaya's eyes were distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the firelight. The strangers were only the beginning. Others will come, more determined, more dangerous. They will not be so easily turned away. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "What do we do?" Kaya's gaze sharpened, focusing on him. "We prepare. The island will guide us, but we must be ready to defend it. You have learned much, Elias, but there is still more you must know." Chapter 15. The Hidden Chamber. The next morning, Kaya led Elias deep into the jungle, to a place he had never been before. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, and the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches forming a canopy so dense that barely any sunlight filtered through. The ground was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, and Elias had to watch his step to keep from tripping. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a massive stone structure, half buried in the earth and overgrown with vines. It was a temple, larger and more imposing than the one Elias had found on his first day. The entrance was a narrow archway, its edges carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as Elias looked at them. "This is the Heart Temple," Kaya said, her voice low and reverent. "It is the most sacred place on the island. Only the keepers may enter." Elias followed her inside, his heart pounding. The air was cool and damp, and the walls were lined with more of the glowing symbols. At the center of the temple was a large, circular chamber, its ceiling open to the sky. In the middle of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested a massive crystal, its surface smooth and translucent. It pulsed with a soft, golden light, casting shimmering reflections on the walls. "This is the heart of the island," Kaya said, gesturing to the crystal. "It is the source of the island's power, the core of its consciousness. It is also its greatest vulnerability." Elias stared at the crystal, mesmerized. He could feel its energy, a low hum that resonated deep within him. "What do you mean, vulnerability?" Kaya's expression was grave. "If the heart is destroyed, the island will die. And if it falls into the wrong hands, the consequences will be catastrophic. The power it holds could reshape the world, or destroy it." Elias felt a surge of fear. "Why are you showing me this?" Kaya placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm and reassuring. "Because you are ready. The island has chosen you, Elias, not just to protect its secrets, but to safeguard its heart. You must be prepared to do whatever it takes to keep it safe." Elias nodded, though his stomach churned. The weight of his responsibility felt heavier than ever, but he knew he couldn't turn away. He had sworn to protect the island, and he would see that oath through, no matter the cost. Chapter 16. The Gathering Storm. Over the next few weeks, Elias and Kaya worked tirelessly to prepare for the coming threat. They reinforced the temple's defenses, setting traps and barriers to deter intruders. They also trained together, honing their skills and deepening their connection to the island. Elias learned to harness the power of the pendant, using it to enhance his strength, speed, and senses. He felt more in tune with the island than ever, but the constant hum of its presence was a reminder of the danger that loomed on the horizon. One night, as Elias stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, he saw a flicker of light in the distance. At first, he thought it was a star, but as he watched, it grew brighter, closer. His heart sank as he realized what it was: a ship, larger and more formidable than the last. It was heading straight for the island. He ran to find Kaya, who was meditating in the temple. "They're here," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Another ship?" Kaya's eyes snapped open, her expression grim. "How many?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "But it's bigger than the last one. They're not here to explore, they're here to take." Kaya stood, her movements swift and decisive. "Then we must be ready. The island will fight with us, but we cannot afford to make mistakes." Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. He had faced his fears, confronted his doubts, and embraced his role as a keeper. Now it was time to prove himself. Chapter 17. The Battle for the Island. The ship anchored offshore, and dozens of figures began to disembark, their movements organized and purposeful. They were armed, their weapons glinting in the moonlight, and they moved with a precision that spoke of training and discipline. Elias and Kaya watched from the shadows, their presence hidden by the jungle's dense foliage. "They're not explorers," Elias whispered. "They're soldiers." Kaya's eyes narrowed. "Mercenaries. They've been sent to take the heart." Elias felt a surge of anger. "We can't let them." Kaya placed a hand on his arm, her touch steadying. "We won't. But we must be smart. We cannot fight them head-on. There are too many. We must use the island's power to our advantage." Elias nodded, his mind racing. He could feel the island's energy pulsing through him, the pendant warm against his chest. He closed his eyes, focusing on the connection, and felt the island respond. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. As the mercenaries advanced, the jungle came alive. Vines snaked out to entangle them, roots rose from the ground to trip them, and the trees themselves seemed to close in, blocking their path. The mercenaries shouted in confusion and fear, their weapons useless against the island's defenses. Elias and Kaya moved through the chaos, their movements swift and silent. They struck from the shadows, using the island's power to disorient and disable their enemies. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline as he fought, his connection to the island guiding his every move. But the mercenaries were relentless. Despite the island's efforts, they pressed forward, their determination unwavering. Elias realized with a sinking feeling that they were heading straight for the Heart Temple. "We have to stop them," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Kaya nodded, her expression grim. "Then we make our stand at the temple. The island will give us strength, but we must be prepared to sacrifice everything." Elias felt a flicker of fear, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of purpose. He had sworn to protect the island, and he would do so, no matter the cost. Chapter 18. The Final Stand. The mercenaries reached the Heart Temple just as Elias and Kaya arrived. The crystal pulsed with a fierce light, its energy radiating through the chamber. The mercenaries hesitated, their eyes wide with awe and fear, but their leader, a tall, imposing figure with a scar across his face, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the crystal. "Take it," he ordered, his voice cold and commanding. Elias and Kaya moved to block their path, their weapons at the ready. "You're not taking anything," Elias said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. The leader smirked. "You think you can stop us? 2 against dozens?" Kaya's eyes blazed with defiance. "We are not alone." As if in response, the island roared. The ground shook, the walls of the temple trembled, and the air filled with a deafening hum. The mercenaries stumbled, their confidence faltering, but their leader remained steadfast. "Destroy them," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal. Elias and Kaya fought with everything they had, their movements fueled by the island's power. The mercenaries were strong, but they were no match for the combined force of the keepers and the island itself. Elias felt a surge of energy as he fought, the pendant burning against his chest. He moved with a speed and precision he had never known, his connection to the island guiding his every move. But even as he fought, he knew they were outnumbered. The mercenaries were relentless, and their leader was closing in on the crystal. With a desperate cry, Elias threw himself in front of the leader, blocking his path. The man sneered, raising his weapon, but before he could strike, the crystal flared with a blinding light. The leader froze, his eyes wide with shock, and then he crumpled to the ground, his body lifeless. The remaining mercenaries hesitated, their resolve shattered. One by one, they turned and fled, their cries of fear echoing through the temple. Elias sank to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. Kaya stood beside him, her breathing ragged but her expression triumphant. "We did it," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. Kaya nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "The island is safe. But this is only the beginning. Others will come, and we must be ready." Elias looked at the crystal, its light steady and reassuring. He knew Kaya was right, the battle for the island was far from over. But he also knew that he was ready. He had faced his fears, embraced his destiny, and proven himself as a keeper. And as long as he drew breath, he would protect the island and its secrets, no matter the cost. Chapter 19. The Aftermath. The temple was silent, save for the faint hum of the heart crystal and the distant sounds of the jungle reclaiming its peace. Elias sat on the stone floor, his body aching, his mind still reeling from the battle. The pendant around his neck pulsed faintly, a reminder of the island's presence and the bond they shared. Kaya stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the crystal, her expression unreadable. "We need to secure the temple," she said finally, breaking the silence. "The mercenaries may have fled, but they'll regroup. And others will come." Elias nodded, though the thought of more battles filled him with dread. "What do we do?" Kaya turned to him, her eyes sharp and determined. "We strengthen our defenses. We use the island's power to make it impossible for anyone to reach the heart. And we prepare for the next wave." Elias took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He had come too far to falter now. "All right, where do we start?" Kaya gestured to the symbols carved into the walls. "The island's power is tied to these symbols. If we activate them, we can create barriers that no one can penetrate. But it will take time, and it will require both of us." Elias stood, his legs still shaky but steady enough to carry him. "Then let's get to work." Chapter 20. The Awakening. Over the next few days, Elias and Kaya worked tirelessly to activate the symbols in the temple. The process was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Each symbol required a ritual, a combination of chanting, meditation, and physical touch to awaken its power. Elias felt the strain of it in his bones, but he also felt a growing sense of connection to the island. The pendant around his neck grew warmer with each symbol they activated, and the hum of the heart crystal became a constant presence in his mind. As they worked, Elias began to notice changes in himself. His senses sharpened. He could hear the faintest rustle of leaves, smell the subtle shifts in the air, and see in the dark as if it were daylight. His strength and speed increased, and he found that he could move through the jungle with an almost supernatural grace. The island was changing him, molding him into something more than human. Kaya noticed it too. "The island is strengthening you," she said one evening as they rested by the fire. "It's preparing you for what's to come." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Kaya's expression was serious. "The battles we've faced so far are nothing compared to what's coming. The island's power is growing, and so is the threat. There are forces in the world, ancient, powerful forces, that will stop at nothing to claim it. You must be ready." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of forces?" Kaya's eyes darkened. "The kind that have been waiting for centuries. The kind that will bring the world to its knees if they succeed." Elias didn't respond, but the weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. He had sworn to protect the island, but he was beginning to realize just how much was at stake. Chapter 21. The Vision. One night, as Elias slept, he had a dream, or perhaps it was more than a dream. He found himself standing in a vast, empty space, the ground beneath his feet shifting and shimmering like liquid. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds. In the distance, he saw a figure, a man, tall and imposing, his features obscured by shadow. The man turned to face Elias, and even from a distance, Elias could feel the power radiating from him. It was a cold, malevolent power, and it filled Elias with a deep, primal fear. "You cannot protect it forever," the man said, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "The island's power belongs to me. And I will take it no matter the cost." Elias tried to speak, but no words came out. The man raised a hand, and the ground beneath Elias's feet began to crack and crumble. He felt himself falling, the darkness closing in around him. He woke with a start, his heart pounding, his body drenched in sweat. Kaya was beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her expression concerned. "What did you see?" she asked. Elias took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "A man," he said. "He said he's coming for the island." Kaya's eyes narrowed. "Describe him." Elias did his best, though the details were hazy. Kaya listened intently, her expression growing darker with each word. "It's him," she said finally. "The one we've been waiting for. The one the island has feared for centuries." Elias felt a surge of panic. "Who is he?" Kaya's voice was low and grim. "His name is Malachar. He is a sorcerer, ancient and powerful. He has sought the island's power for generations, and he will not stop until he has it." Elias's mind raced. "What do we do?" Kaya's gaze was steady. "We prepare. We strengthen the island's defenses. And we ready ourselves for the final battle." Chapter 22, The Gathering Storm. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Elias and Kaya worked tirelessly to fortify the temple and the surrounding jungle. They activated more symbols, creating barriers and traps that would deter even the most determined intruders. They also trained together, honing their skills and deepening their connection to the island. But despite their efforts, Elias couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled over him. The vision of Malachar haunted his thoughts, and he could feel the island's unease, as if it too were preparing for the coming storm. One evening, as they stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, Elias turned to Kaya. "What happens if we fail? If Malachar takes the heart?" Kaya's expression was grim. "If Malachar takes the heart, he will use its power to reshape the world in his image. He will bring chaos and destruction on a scale that has never been seen before. The island will die, and with it, all hope for balance and peace." Elias felt a surge of determination. "Then we can't let that happen. No matter what?" Kaya nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You are stronger than you know, Elias. The island chose you for a reason. Together, we will face Malachar, and we will protect the heart." Elias took a deep breath, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. But he also felt a flicker of hope. He had faced his fears, embraced his destiny, and found a purpose greater than himself. He was ready. Chapter 23, The Final Battle. The storm came at dawn. The sky darkened, the wind howled, and the sea churned with a fury that seemed almost unnatural. Elias and Kaya stood at the entrance to the Heart Temple, their weapons at the ready, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Malachar's ship appeared out of the storm, its black sails billowing in the wind. It anchored offshore, and a small boat was lowered into the water. Malachar himself stepped into the boat, his presence radiating power and menace. He was exactly as Elias had seen him in his vision, tall, imposing, his features obscured by shadow. Elias felt a surge of fear, but he forced himself to stand firm. Kaya placed a hand on his arm, her touch steadying. "Remember," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The island is with us. We are not alone." Elias nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. He could feel the island's energy pulsing through him, the pendant warm against his chest. He was ready. Malachar reached the shore, his movements slow and deliberate. He stepped onto the beach, his gaze fixed on the temple. Elias and Kaya moved to block his path, their weapons at the ready. "You cannot win," Malachar said, his voice cold and mocking. "The island's power belongs to me." Kaya's eyes blazed with defiance. "The island will never be yours." Malachar smirked. "We shall see." The battle that followed was fierce and brutal. Malachar's power was immense, his attacks relentless. But Elias and Kaya fought with everything they had, their movements fueled by the island's energy. The jungle came alive around them, the trees and vines lashing out at Malakar, the ground itself rising up to hinder him. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline as he fought, his connection to the island guiding his every move. He struck with a speed and precision he had never known, his attacks fueled by a strength that seemed almost supernatural. But Malakar was relentless, his power growing with each passing moment. With a desperate cry, Elias threw himself at Malakar, his weapon aimed at the sorcerer's heart. Malakar raised a hand, and a blast of energy sent Elias flying. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. Kaya stepped in, her movements swift and precise. She struck at Malakar with a ferocity that surprised even Elias, but the sorcerer was too powerful. With a wave of his hand, he sent her sprawling. Elias struggled to his feet, his body aching, his vision blurred. He could feel the island's energy fading, the pendant around his neck growing cold. Malakar stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "It's over," he said, his voice cold and final. But Elias wasn't ready to give up. He reached deep within himself, drawing on the last reserves of his strength. He felt the island's energy surge through him, the pendant glowing with a fierce light. With a cry of defiance, he launched himself at Malakar, his weapon aimed at the sorcerer's heart. The two collided in a burst of light and energy. For a moment, everything was still. Then Malakar stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down at the weapon buried in his chest, then up at Elias, his expression one of disbelief. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You cannot?" But his words were cut off as he crumpled to the ground, his body lifeless. Elias sank to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. Kaya appeared beside him, her expression one of awe and pride. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "You defeated him." Elias looked at Malakar's lifeless body, then at the temple, its walls glowing with a soft, golden light. He felt a surge of relief, but also a deep sense of peace. The island was safe, and he had proven himself worthy of its trust. Chapter 24. A New Beginning. The storm passed, and the island was once again bathed in sunlight. Elias and Kaya stood on the cliffs, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The sea was calm, the sky clear, and the air filled with the sounds of the jungle. "What happens now?" Elias asked, his voice quiet. Kaya smiled. "Now we rebuild. We strengthen the island's defenses. And we prepare for whatever comes next." Elias nodded, though his mind was already racing with thoughts of the future. He had faced his fears, embraced his destiny, and proven himself as a keeper. But he also knew that the island's trials were never-ending. There would always be new threats, new challenges, and new mysteries to uncover. But for now, he was content. He had found his place in the world, a place where the past, present, and future converged, and where the line between reality and myth blurred. He was a keeper, a protector, and a guardian of the island's secrets. And he was ready for whatever came next. The end.